Today, we're going to tackle a question that, let's be honest, probably keeps a lot of us up at night. How does a small, seemingly manageable conflict suddenly explode into a devastating world war?
You see a quote like this from a regular person on the internet, and yeah, it really hits home, doesn't it? It perfectly captures this feeling of global anxiety, the sense that there are flashpoints just everywhere, and that the whole thing could spiral out of control at any moment.
And a headline like this, even if it's just a hypothetical, taps right into that feeling, that anxiety. It's a stark reminder of just how quickly our world can feel dangerous and unpredictable. But here's the thing. What if we're looking at this whole problem the wrong way? What if we're asking the wrong questions? So let's try something different. Let's explore a new framework for thinking about this. Instead of just reacting to scary headlines, what if we could actually understand the engine driving these events? This is all about shifting our focus from what might happen to how it happens. And this is the big idea, the crucial pivot. The first question, will there be a war? That's a prediction game. And predicting the future is, well, it's notoriously difficult, if not impossible. But the second question, how do wars get big? That's about a process. And that's a question we can actually get our hands on with a scientific approach. It changes everything.
Okay, so at the very heart of this new way of thinking is one single powerful idea called the escalation factor. You can just call it lambda. It sounds complicated, but it's actually super simple. All you do is take the number of battle deaths in 1 year and divide it by the number from the year before. That one little number tells you everything you need to know about whether a war is growing, shrinking, or just staying the same.
Let me walk you through how this works. It's actually pretty simple. So imagine a conflict kicks off with 1,000 battle deaths in its first year. If its escalation factor is 2, well, the next year you've got 2,000 deaths. The war is clearly escalating. But then, say the factor drops to 0.5. The following year, the number of deaths is cut in half, back down to 1,000. It's de-escalating. This simple up and down mechanic, that's the engine that determines the size of a war.
Okay, so once you start using this lens, this idea of an escalation factor, something really interesting happens. You start to see fundamental differences in the way wars behave. You realize not all wars are created equal.
And this is maybe the biggest takeaway from the research. Civil wars, conflicts happening inside a country, they seem to have a kind of built-in braking system. When they get really big, really bloody, really costly, they tend to run out of steam and naturally de-escalate. But interstate wars, wars between nations, they don't have that same brake. They carry this constant nagging risk of just growing bigger and bigger and bigger.
And this quote right here really digs into the why behind that difference. Think about it. A country, a state, can tax its entire population, it can draft millions of citizens into the army, it can mobilize its whole national economy for the war effort in a way that, say, a rebel group just can't. States have a much, much deeper well of resources to pull from, which lets them keep fueling that fire of escalation.
But here's where it gets kind of weird, a real paradox in the data. Even though those interstate wars can get way bigger, way faster, it's actually civil wars that tend to drag on for longer. They might not be as intense from year to year, but man, they can grind on for decades. Interstate wars, on the other hand, are often these shorter, sharper, more violent shocks to the system.
So, the big question is, right, can we use this model to predict the future? Can it be our crystal ball? Well, yes and no, and that's where this gets really fascinating. We can absolutely use it for forecasting, but its real power might be in showing us the very limits of what we can possibly know.
So to really push this model to its limits, the researchers asked a pretty provocative question. What would a hypothetical new civil war in the United States look like? They plugged in the country's population data to set the initial scale, and then they just let the escalation engine run to see what kinds of futures it would spit out. And what they found, well, it's pretty staggering. The forecasts generated this massive range of possible outcomes. Some scenarios ended with just a few thousand deaths. Others ended with over 1 million. Now, the key here isn't the number 1 million. That's not a prediction. The real insight is the enormous range, the enormous uncertainty that the process of escalation creates. And that's really the crucial takeaway. The real power of this model isn't giving us one solid, certain number to latch onto. No, its power is in showing us, in stark mathematical terms, just how uncertain the future of any conflict truly is. A tiny little change in the escalation factor 1 year can lead to a completely, radically different outcome just a few years down the line. All right, so where does all of this leave us?
Well, the escalation engine isn't a crystal ball. It can't tell us the future. But it gives us something way more valuable, I think. It gives us a new perspective, a whole new way to see and understand the actual machinery of war.
So let's just quickly run through what we've learned, because it's so important. First, big wars don't just appear out of thin air. They are built, year by year, through the process of escalation. Second, how much a war changes matters more than its starting size. That little spark isn't as important as the fuel that's added later. Third, civil wars have that internal brake system, while interstate wars have this terrifying potential for runaway growth. And finally, and maybe most importantly, understanding these mechanics is a much more powerful tool than just trying to guess what's going to happen next.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that feeling of a world like a powder keg. If this escalation engine is the thing that turns small sparks into massive infernos, then we have to ask ourselves a pretty critical question. As we look around the world today, at all the different tensions and flashpoints, which ones have the fuel and which ones have the mechanics to truly escalate? That's the question this new perspective really forces us to confront.